This program is brought to you by Resonance 104.4 FM. If you like what you hear and want to support our work, please make a donation at fundraiser.resonance.fm.
It's time now for The Workplace with me, NND, here on Resonance 104.4 FM, where U.S. thought leader and career expert Dr. Tracy Wilen joins us on the topic of summer gigs to tell us why crowdsourcing and crowdfunding are on the up for summer job trends. Dr. Wilen, welcome to The Workplace here on Resonance 104.4 FM.
Thank you.
All right, so today we are talking about summer gigs. And it's not the playing in a band type, it's actually about getting jobs. So tell us, in a nutshell, what you're going to be telling us about today.
That's right. So there is a new trend, and I always want our listeners to know what some of the new employment trends are. And one is that it's called crowdsourcing. I think people have been familiar with crowdsourcing. It's been around since 2008. It's increased over 730%, according to crowdsource.com. And simply put, it's about engaging people in an activity using the Internet. So in essence, we're engaging the crowd and either can tap into wisdom, ideas, money, and now actually talent.
All right, so this is crowdsourcing, is it?
Yes, so crowdsourcing more formally is defined as obtaining information or input into a particular task or project. So in employment, we can enlist the services of a number of people who can be paid or unpaid using the Internet. So let me just give you an example. For employment, we now can tap into the crowd for services to complete tasks, to do small projects. It's sort of like I have a demand for someone to do something, and you are the supply, and I can use the Internet to help connect my demand to you as a skilled person to supply.
So that is crowdsourcing. Is it the same thing as crowdfunding?
So crowdfunding has been around for longer, and I think a lot of people are very familiar with it. It's the practice of actually reaching out to the crowd or the wisdom of people, but now to actually raise money. So I might be a startup, I might have a song, I might have a project, and I'm looking for funding. And I may not be able to get it through the traditional means of going to a bank. And so I reach out and post on different sites. Popular ones in the UK is Seedrs.com, Crowdcube.com, Crowdfunder.com, Buzzbank.com. There's so many. And I reach out and I post out my project or my song or my book or my startup, and people get interested in it and actually start to help fund. And I put in a target of what I think I need to start my business, and people actually donate money. So that's crowdfunding. Crowdsourcing has expanded into other areas, such as organizations use it, as well as services that are very popular today.
So how do organizations use crowdsourcing?
You know, I was at the Apple developer meeting, and they have been using crowdsourcing for a long time, but they crowdsource innovation. And what they explained is that they actually pay a lot of money, over $10 billion, to developers globally to help it really pretty much develop apps for their phones, apps for their pads, apps for their computer systems. Because what they're realizing is that you have excellent talent inside your company, but you have innovative people globally. And so they offer money for people to develop different products and services for their product line. And that is a form of actually crowdsourcing talent. Another example is General Electric. They've also realized that they're a very large company with great employees, but some of the best ideas are actually around the world. So they actually offer money. They put up $6 billion to ask people to send them their great ideas on how to advance their products. So it's quite popular. The last one I'll mention is the X Prize. And I think many people today have heard about the X Prize. But what it is, you can go to the website, and people like Google or Nokia post big projects. You know, how can I get a robotic lunar, cart on the moon? And how can I crowdsource innovative ideas from scientists and entrepreneurs all over the world. And if this is more of a competition, and if your idea wins, you can make $30 million. I mean, they're high stakes for high stake ideas, and it's quite interesting how this has really caught on.
A concern I've always had about crowdsourcing or crowdfunding and so on is that you're opening up the internet, you're opening up, to basically the whole world. What about any concerns about ethics with that? So, like for me, even though I want a project to take off, I don't necessarily want to collaborate with every single person who might want to collaborate because of their ethics. You have any views on that?
Well, yes, and I understand your concern and question. One, you need to look at the sites and what the projects are. And something like the X Prize, teams actually can come in and pose their ideas. They're not necessarily teaming up with others. In fact, when I looked at the Google Lunar X Prize, that one really, I saw a lot of teams who came in together to pitch their ideas because they're in close proximity. In terms of crowdsourcing for employment, which I think is quite interesting, that is, it's just becoming a mechanism where we can post jobs. So the example I like to always give is Walmart. Walmart is based in Arkansas, but they might be opening up a super mega store in the UK. And Walmart needs to monitor the opening. What do the products look good? Are there enough handicap parking spaces in the parking lot? But they may not want to fly someone to the UK to monitor these things. So instead they post on a website, right? Basically GigWalk is an example, what the project is. And you as an individual can sign up as an individual. And you would go and walk the aisles with your smart device, and you would take photos or videos, and then you have a one-to-one relationship with Walmart. So not all of these crowd activities necessitate you working with other people, but you certainly can.
Yeah, but I'm concerned about, let's say I were a vegetarian, which I absolutely am not, but I only want to collaborate on projects with vegetarians, for example. I don't want any meat eaters involved in my project, for example. Is there any way to sort of monitor that or make it happen? Or not really?
Yeah, and I think, just as an aside, I think the idea of when you're crowdsourcing talent, it's not necessarily to make them work together. It's you're pulling in ideas or funds from individuals, but it's in a crowd effect. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so really, we're not concerned with who is giving the ideas.
Right. So let's just go back to the Apple example. I, as an individual, can supply an app to Apple. They are reaching out to the world to give them apps for phones. It doesn't mean I have to work with the world on a collaborative app. It means that I can be one of thousands of people who can propose an app to Apple, and they may pay me directly for that app.
Okay. Airbnb has gotten very popular. Is that crowdsourcing?
Well, actually it is. It's sort of a crowdsourced concept. So the idea is that people have homes and rooms, the supply, and they can rent them to people who desire to stay, and that's the demand, and not pay the prices for example, of a hotel or a sophisticated B&B. The rate is often lower because people are basically, offering up space that they have to other people in the local area. And it's really taking off in certain locations. So let's say I'm going to London or San Francisco or Miami. Hotels are very expensive. So I'm always looking to see how can I get either a lower cost B&B or in this case an Airbnb. So that's where an individual maybe has a 5-bedroom home out in the country, and they're willing to rent me a room, a shower, obviously, and use of the facilities at a much lower rate than the hotel. And a lot of people like this type of concept because they're with the owners of a home. They learn more about a local area and the history. And so basically that's a crowdsourcing, basically supply and demand of space for people who need places to stay.
All right. What are other ways that people crowdsource?
Another example is crowdsourcing problem resolution. So the medical community is seeing how valuable it is to crowdsource ideas. As I mentioned, Apple uses it, General Electric uses it. Well, why not really tap into the crowd to help us solve some large medical problems? So there are sites now where you actually can post a complex medical case. I have this patient, they have this kinds of symptoms, this is what the issues are. I, in my medical community, we can't resolve what it is. So can I reach out to the broader universe for anyone who may be able to add ideas or concepts to help us resolve this medical case? And so that's another area that I'm seeing taking off, as well as pharmaceutical. We have, are there ideas from pharmacists around the world on what kind of drugs can be customized so that we can solve some of these problems and diseases?
You mentioned something about The Guardian called it a call out for groups of people to engage by carrying out tasks.
Exactly. So, today crowdsourcing, we've learned about its funding, its ideas, its problem solving, and now companies and organizations are saying, I can use crowdsourcing in the employment arena, whether it's calling out, as The Guardian says, groups of people to do tasks, or something that I, as a small firm, can tap into people who are specialized in certain areas who can help me perhaps from a distance or locally. And so not only small firms, but also large firms are crowdsourcing talent for various tasks and projects. In fact, it's becoming a big new trend because part-time work is on the rise, but also you can get to these jobs and tasks faster than through a job board, for example, where you send in a resume. You can actually go out to apps or websites and find things that are out there that you can really take advantage of.
Sometimes on Facebook, people would put out, you hear these stories of teenagers put out a message, I'm having a party at my house. And then all of a sudden, 1,000 people descend on the house. Do you ever have any kind of similar thing with crowdsourcing? Can some situation happen that turns out to be unmanageable or unwieldy, or not really?
Well, it could. I think that's up to the individual to manage that. That happens on Twitter as well. The celebrities have huge followings, and if they said show up somewhere, they probably would get thousands of them. On a more practical level, there's a crowdsourcing app, actually, Meetup, and you can post a social event on Meetup, but it's more formalized. So, for example, I have a friend of mine who has a very large wine meetup group in California all around wine tasting. And when he posts an event at a restaurant or a bar, basically they have a limitation. They can't have thousands of people showing up to go and taste wine, although they'd love to have the revenue, but their capacity is, for example, only 200. And so he puts in the parameters and can cut off people. So there are mechanisms in place if you want to formalize crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, and basically socializing at crowds. And I think that's up to the individual to make a decision. Are you going to go through the formalized channel like a meetup that has those controls, or are you just going to splurt out there, hey, on Facebook, thousands of people just show up, and then I could see it becoming very unruly and very unwanted, quite frankly.
Tell me, what's the difference between crowdsourcing and contracting?
So, crowdsourcing is, I think it's a faster velocity to getting to these jobs. If you're contracting, you either apply to a firm or you apply to a job board, you send in the resume, a lot of people call it the black hole, and you hope and you wait to find out if you're hired for a long-term position or a part-time position. In crowdsourced jobs, it's quite interesting. You can go to an app like a GigWalk, you can go to an app like an Uber, and you can see in real time demand. So this is where the supply and demand comes in. So if you want to work in that moment, at that moment, or for that day, you can do it. There might be different criteria that different sites have, but it's much more in real time. And I think a lot of people really embrace that opportunity rather than sending in the resumes and just sitting back and waiting for someone to contact you for a job.
Now, what are you saying? Is it right at the moment you can turn up for the job?
Yes, well, some of the sites, so let me just give an example, because I think people understand Uber and Lyft. Uber in particular is pretty globalized now.
Uber and Lyft are examples of crowdsourced jobs.
Yes, they are.
Right.
Because basically we're crowdsourcing drivers, people who have cars, and are willing to share their car and a ride for people who need rides and maybe can't find a taxi or public transportation at that moment. Now, there are some criteria because of driving, right? You have to download the app, you sign up, right, so you have the system, and then you would need to pass various tests. So in Uber, for example, they have criteria that your car needs to be a certain year or later. Maybe it's a 2008 or later. It needs to be a 4-seat car. You need to have a background check. And they can do this in a matter of a day or two. So then you're in their system as a driver who qualifies. You have a good driving record. They have insurance. You have insurance. You don't have any drug history. You don't have any misdemeanor history. And basically you have a car that is suitable enough to take passengers. Once you're in the system, I as a rider, because I use Uber quite frankly globally, I can just go on demand and look for a car. Is there a car in my vicinity? And by using the app, I'm signaling out to a very large group of people that I need a ride. The person who is closest to me will get that opportunity to pick me up, and they can either accept it or they can turn it down. And if they accept it, then they engage with me, and I pay them for the ride. And all of this is done electronically, so there's no passing of cash. Every trip is recorded using the GPS system, so a driver can't really take me on an odd route like I've experienced with many taxi cabs. And we know, I know that the car is going to have a certain criteria met, which sometimes, quite frankly, I don't always know with taxi cabs. So Uber is just an example of crowdsourcing people who want to share their cars with people who need a ride and are willing to pay for it. And people actually make careers out of working for Uber and some of these on-demand driving.
Well, because Uber is such a very tense topic of discussion in the UK, I think I'm going to move on and ask you, what are some other jobs that are crowdsourced?
Sure. There's an area called micro work, and there's a number of websites that have short, data-driven type jobs. Amazon, for example, has one where they will post different kinds of jobs that they're looking for people who are talented at maybe doing data searches, data analytics, and you can be really anywhere in the world, and then they will post the job, and then you can apply to do the job if you meet a criteria. And so that's called micro work. So it can be small things, maybe take 10 minutes to do, maybe it takes an hour to do. Another one that I mentioned before, the Walmart example, is gig walk. And gig walk is actually used by a lot of retailers, Walmart, BMW, 7-Eleven, eBay, and actually you get paid by the hour to walk through retail establishments, and this can be anywhere, for a set rate of perhaps £12 an hour or £15 an hour. But basically you're street on the feet for employers who may be somewhere else in the world to do different activity and tasks. And you, by using your smart device, whether it's a video camera or most people just use their phone, you can actually help people and keep yourself employed in a local area, even though the retail establishment may be in a different part of the world. I think that one is very interesting because it can actually increase local employment. So if I choose to be a gig walker and they accept, we have a transaction. It might be on the app, but I am going to be submitting files with the understanding that I will be getting paid for it. So it's more of I engage. For another example is Moby.com, for example. A retailer or a store may say, I need a mystery shopper in this store at this time, right? If I apply for that and am accepted, I choose to do that and they accept, I will get paid for that activity, provided that I meet the criteria. So it isn't like I'm sitting and waiting for a phone call. It's more transactional that I can actually do the transaction or not.
You've put in the lineup here surge pricing. Can you explain surge pricing?
Surge pricing is, if we go back to the transportation examples, and Uber is just one example in transportation. I need to mention that many companies now are seeing the Uber model in other delivery areas. So if you have a truck, or if you would like to deliver on demand, because as you know, during the holidays, we have extra packages that need to be delivered. We have, during certain seasons, we might have to have more runs from a store bringing packages or deliveries or fruit to another location. So there is this demand for drivers who have trucks or delivery vehicles. And during certain times, right, when there's very high demand, the example I give is when you're trying to get a taxi cab and it's pouring rain out and you can't, then you have something called surge pricing. Holiday season package deliveries, bad weather usually drive a lot of people to want to be able to use transportation other than their own. So surge pricing is, again, it's elective by the passenger and by the driver, but it may post to say, well, instead of a regular fare, because the demand is so high, I might have to charge you twice the fare because there are not enough drivers or delivery trucks out there. And I, as a passenger or the customer, may or may not agree to it. If I don't agree to it, then I don't accept it. If I do agree to it, I may accept it. Surge pricing is interesting. As a customer, yes, I have to pay more, but it may be for a service that I wouldn't get anyway. But I, as an employee, I can make more money because what it signals to me is that there's not enough drivers out there. There's such a demand that the employer is letting me know, we need you to work. So if you're willing to drive in the rain, drive in the snow, drive during rush hour, or drive during holiday season, you can actually get, it's sort of like an overtime. I'll give you extra money for participating during a time when other people may not.
Well,
that's called surge pricing.
Let me tell you this. Last week, there was basically like a 24-hour tube strike. The underground, the trains, there was a strike, so the trains weren't running at all. And Uber used the opportunity to hike up their price by a substantial amount. And a lot of people got really annoyed about it. So you as the driver, would you be able to, let's say you didn't want to hike up the price, would you be able to not go along with that?
I am not an Uber driver, so I don't know if I could adjust the fare, is basically what you're saying. But, you're bringing up a very interesting point because it comes up a lot. Uber was something that did not exist. I, as a consumer, have had pretty structured choices. I can drive myself, I can take the tube, I can take a bus, I can walk. Now, all of a sudden, now I have a fifth choice. I can take an Uber or a Lyft or whatever the service is. That's my choice. I don't have to take that because I've always had a number of transportation choices. But interesting enough, now this new choice is actually cost efficient. It's faster for me to access. It has a higher level of service, and so I want it. Now, some of the dilemma is, are there enough drivers in the location to be able to service the demand? When the tube goes down, well, most people in the old scenario would have to either drive, take a bus, or walk. In the new scenario, there is another example out there called Uber. And so I don't see it as a bad thing. I just think that's supply and demand. That's the realities of not getting home versus paying a premium because everybody wants to get home at that exact moment.
Well, I'll tell you that this side of the Atlantic, they have a very different view of that. So let's go on a bit now to employment trends.
Yeah.
We're up to employment trends
let me just give you some of the other examples because, let's face it, on-demand jobs in these apps are global because I can be living anywhere in the world, and if the job that's in demand is in my local area, then I can take action using the app. So another one is called Instacart. There are on-demand grocery services. So let's say I am great at picking out fruit and meat. in a store. There are people who may be homebound, they may be sick, they may be working, they may be traveling, may have large families who actually need help. They need people to help them grocery shop. And so I can find these apps and become a grocery shopper for somebody. It's not an online activity. It's actually a physical activity. I will go to the local grocery store and do the activity for them, and they'll pay me for doing that. And again, all of this is online, so the transaction is done through either a PayPal system or direct deposit to your bank. Another example is Alfred.com. Alfred, a lot of people might remember the butlers were called Alfred.com. I have colleagues who have used these different kinds of butler services because they have a wedding event and they need more help, or they have a large party, or they have a lot of guests coming to spend the summer with them, and they need some extra help. So they can reach out and post their project or their event, and people in the local area can say, yes, I can be a butler for a day. I can do those party activities. I can service. I can do driving. I can do whatever it is that you want. Another example is Washio.com. Just an example of laundry services. If you can imagine, people like myself, we're traveling 70% of the time. A lot of times our laundry builds up and we don't get a chance to do it. And when we get home, the piles are pretty high and we're still working. Well, it's great to know that I can go out and have someone through the Washio service who can come and pick up and do my laundry for me. They can do it in the local wash center, and perhaps they can do it in my house. And so what we're seeing is that a number of services that we do day to day, we can also outsource to the local community. And it's really the app or the internet that's connecting me with people I may have not even known that are willing and have the skills to do different activities, while at the same time giving them money and hiring them to do tasks.
All right. So now we're on to trends with regard to people working part-time. Do a lot of people work part-time?
Well, it is a growing trend. So just to give you a comparison in population, the U.S. is around 320 million people, and we have over 156 million are actually employed. Of that, about 53 million are actually freelancing or working part-time. The UK, comparatively, has a population of around 65 million, and about 31 million are actually working. The estimates from the Professional Contractors Group in the UK is that about 1.4 million British are freelancing, and that while it's not as much as in the U.S., it has certainly grown over 14%, they say, in the last decade. So a lot of this is a trend which is created either in a number of ways. One is people may have been laid off from a full-time position and now are supplementing it while they're looking for jobs by working part-time. Some people our younger generation is looking at freelancing and contracting as a better way of life for themselves.
Better work-life balance.
Exactly, the work-life balance. Why should I travel or commute to a job and stay in an office for 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, when I have a life, when I have kids, when I have, aspirations of things to do other than just working in a job from 9 to 5. And so freelancing or creating portfolio careers is something that's actually on the rise because it's now of choice. I'd like to pick my hours. I'd also like to pick the different projects that I participate in. I might want to do a creative project one day, or I may want to do a data project one day, or a marketing project one day. And together, can I piece together a whole career about picking and choosing different jobs and projects on my timeline and within a pay realm that I'm comfortable with.
So this is a pick and mix career building.
Actually,
do you know pick and
yes,
mix?
Yes, and I think, it's probably more popular in the U.S. just from looking at the numbers and the size, that there's more of a comfort from our younger generation here and an expectation that they're not going to do employment the same way that their parents did, that they really want to have more control and be able to define their lives based on what they're interested in, rather than have a company say, this is what you'll be doing for me, and then you're very upset and you feel like your life is moving ahead, while you have no control over it. So I think that is a trend that will continue to grow. Career Builder has certainly said this is something that will continue to grow, at least in the U.S., and I suspect in the U.K. it will grow as well. And Snagajob was saying, at least in the U.S., that this is becoming very popular for summer jobs and seasonal hiring as well.
So jobs are on the up this summer.
Jobs are be up on the up this summer, but again, it depends on location. And I always say to people, it might say that jobs are on the up in the U.S. or on the up in the U.K., but it may not be in your specific location. So you have to realize in summer, a lot of seasonal hiring happens. So the stores have sales in London. So you may be able to find more retail jobs there, more restaurant jobs there. Vacations increase in certain parts of the country, and so you may find that there's more jobs in that part of the country, but you may not have the demand in your local area. So I think it's important that we look at where will the demand be for hiring over the summer and set our sights on, do I need to be in that location to take advantage of the additional hiring opportunities that it might offer.
Great. Dr. Wilen, thanks so much for being with us here on The Workplace on Resonance 104.4 FM.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to all those who made today's program possible, and thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure being in your company. Make sure to stay tuned to Resonance 104.4 FM and resonancefm.com online, the art of listening. Until next time, keep working.
This program has been brought to you by Resonance 104.4 FM. If you liked what you heard and want to support our work, please make a donation at fundraiser.resonance.fm.